So Hashir. Rosa Parks, she already went through it. You ain't got to sit in the back. You can come up here. I feel. Was that Lighter Brothers? What are y'all are virtually the same? Okay, mashallah, mashallah, mashallah. Which- No, here, take this one too. Take this one too. You look like you need it. Go ahead, Bismillah. Say Bismillah. Y'all can share. Huh? Give it to the back. Huh? Yeah. طيب, so, inshallah, I'm going to jump in right now. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala thumma amma ba'd. So we begin as we should and as we always do with the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the especially merciful. We ask Him and Him alone to send His peace and blessings upon our dear and beloved teacher, leader, and guide, and the best of examples, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his pure family, his good companions, and all of those who would attempt to follow in their footsteps until the day that we're standing in front of our Creator. Allahumma ameen. So as to what follows. So alhamdulillah, we're going through the Tafsir of Amma and continuing with that. And today we're going to be covering Surah Al-Takwir, the 81st chapter of the Quran, in that last portion of the Quran, in the 30th portion of the Quran. And subhanallah, this surah, as far as its name is concerned, is Surah Al-Takwir, which is taken from that term or that word that's actually mentioned in the Quran, kuwirat, right? Which means like a folding up or a wrapping up, right? But that's the only known name for this surah. And as far as virtues are concerned regarding the surah, and the fact that there are some specific statements of the Prophet ﷺ with regards to this surah. There's one that's mentioned in Sunan al-Tirmidhi when the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man sarra an yara," that whoever it would please to, or whoever wants to see the Day of Judgment as if they were looking right at it and the different events and occurrences that happen in that day, then let him read the different chapters. Surah Al-Takwir, Surah Al-Infitar, which we covered last week, and Surah Al-Inshiqaq, which we covered the week before, right? And so, and this hadith was narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, and it's essentially in this hadith telling us what one of the two main themes of this surah is, or one of the main topics. And we could say that it's essentially broken up into two parts. The first part, right, with regards to what this surah, or what the Prophet ﷺ is outright telling us, that the main, or one of the main themes of the surah is Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of resurrection, the day of standing, right? Its events, what's leading up to it, and then what will actually occur once the trumpet is blown, the people are brought back, and the souls are placed back in their bodies, right? And what occurs after that. So the first main idea and theme is what? The Day of Judgment. That's the first thing. And then the second, and that's pretty much ayahs number 1 through 14. That's the first part. Then the second part are ayahs number 15 through 29, and there's 29 ayat in the surah, that it's essentially about revelation. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of his characteristics, Jibreel alayhi salam, and some of his characteristics, but essentially letting us know, right, the first and foremost, who the Quran at the time was directly addressing, the Quraysh and the Arabs, but then everybody else after them, the nature of the Quran and revelation, and just who it is that is entrusted with conveying that message, the Quran. Sheikh, is there something going on here? Oh, okay. Tell you. And so those are the two parts of the surah, right? So we're going to go ahead and start with the first part, بإذن الله تعالى. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He opens up this surah by first mentioning, right, when the sun is wrapped up, right? Or like we said, rolled up, right? Either like a turban or like a scroll. And there are different interpretations from the mufassirun as to what the term kuwirat means. I already said one of them means to like wrap up something or to roll it up. Some of them, they say it means when its light is extinguished, yani when the light of the sun is extinguished, when it's swallowed up. Some say when it's sunken in. Some say when it's shriveled up. Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, the famous mufassir, his Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim, he preferred the opinion that what it literally means, which means that the sun will actually be rolled up, not simply that its light will be extinguished and that it's no longer right illuminating, but that it is actually physically that it will be rolled up and twisted up, right? And this is yani, close to or in line with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the sun and the moon will be wrapped up on the day of resurrection. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that both the sun and the moon will be wrapped up on the day of judgment. And this is, when you think of this particular statement, either shamsu kuwirat, when the sun is wrapped up, this addresses anybody who would worship the sun or think that the sun is some great being or thing that deserves to be worshipped. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us is no, it's just one of many of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Yes, it's great. Yes, it's grand, magnificent, right? Obviously, 93 million miles away. If I'm not mistaken, the size of the sun is 863,000 miles, right? In its radius, 863,000 miles, right? That's the equivalent of, and I'm not just making up these numbers myself. This is like, from Sheikh Google, right? It's about 109 Earths, right? So I was trying to remember what I read. That's what it was. I wasn't like calculating in my head, even though it might seem like that. But it's about 109 Earths. That's how equivalent it is. So it's massive. It's huge, right? No doubt. This is one of, right? It's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us over and over again to reflect on this, creation that He has. But here, Allah is telling us there's going to come a time it's just going to be folded up and wrapped up like any other from His creation, i.e. that it will no longer exist as it did in this plane, right? طيب, going on to the next ayah, وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, and when the stars will fall, right, and dispersing. And so currently you have these systems that are holding all of these different things in place. The stars, the planets, etc. They're all running along systems, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in order for them to exist and be beneficial for us in one way or another. But all of the stars will break away, like was mentioned in Surah Al-Infitar last week, that they're going to break away, that they're going to fall, right? And so what will look like shooting stars. But imagine when you look up on a starry night or a clear night, right? There are millions of stars. And now all of a sudden they're going to be raining down and no longer having their brilliance and their luster and their shine, right? So this is the second thing. Then the third ayah, وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ, and when the mountains are removed. So again, another like universal law, right? That these, mountains are strong, they're firm, we see them, right? And if any of you had either like a geology class or anything like that, you will know that mountains, you have what's on the surface of the earth, what we see, but then inside the earth, mountains have like roots. So they go down into the earth, right? And they're a part and parcel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as serving like pegs, right? That would hold the firmness of the earth so that it doesn't move and shake and what have you. But in spite of that, in spite of them being so strong, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will utterly and completely destroy these to make them level, right? So elsewhere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبُسَّتِ الْجِبَالُ بَسًّا, and when the mountains are broken down and crumbling. And in another place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَسُيِّرَتِ الْجِبَالُ فَكَانَتْ سَرَابًا. So now he even describes what that breaking down will be like. And the mountains will be almost like they're like clouds, right? That are just like, they have nothing to them, right? And so again, this is to show the gravity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the gravity of what is happening. So then the fourth ayah, وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ, and when full-term she-camels are neglected. And so isharu, right, from like ashara, which means 10 in Arabic, right? Ashara means 10. And al-isharu is what they would call in the time, the Arabs in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the most prized possessions, most valuable possessions that they would have are camels in general. This is one thing that they valued. It's a deep part of their culture to this day, right? Think of like America has like an animal that represents it. What's that, y'all? Right? Like on the, when you think of the flag, when you think of like, what I'm saying, money and stuff like that, what animal do you see on it? The bald eagle. It's like a part of, right, the culture of America. It represents, right? So for them, it's like the camel, right? It's something deeply important to them and valuable, yani expensive. So now Isharu is not only simply a camel, but it's a female camel that's pregnant, right? That's 10 months pregnant. Hence Isharu, right? The 10. And the term that camels have for how long they carry their babies to term is anywhere between 11 to 15 months. Then they give birth, right? So at 10 months, it's really close. And of course, why it's even more valuable than just a regular old camel is because this one camel is about to be what? It's about to be two camels, right? Again, which is going to be more milk, more for their transportation, more like things that they can benefit from. It could be another camel that's going to get pregnant and possibly have another camel, right? So it's this very valuable commodity. But when the sun is folded up, when the stars are beginning to fall out of the sky, and the mountains are like nothing but dust, at this point, وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ عُطِّلَتْ, when that camel, which is this most prized possession for those Arabs, they're like, I could care less about this. There's some other things going on right now that are way more concerning for me, and I could care less about this, right? Now, today, none of us are, sheep herders or, own it. Well, I'm assuming none of us own any camels. Maybe some of you do. Maybe you got some farms back home or something like that. But for the most part, most of us don't. So you simply could replace that with anything of value, right? Anything that's extremely expensive, that you value, that you covet, that you put in a lot of work and effort for. And then imagine, right, abandoning that thing and leaving it off. The idea is what? What would cause you to abandon and leave that thing that you covet and prize so much? It might be a home. It might be an expensive car. It might be some career you worked so hard to attain and then you finally got it. What could make you walk away from that thing? Right? You'd be hard pressed. For a lot of us, you'd be hard pressed. Man, it would have to be something a really big deal for me to walk away from. I just got accepted into, the college after all the studying, the hard work, everything I put in. I finally got in, and now I'm going to walk away from that. Or that job that I was trying so hard to get, or that promotion I was trying so hard to get, to just turn away and walk away from it. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to give us context about which of the things, the context of the day of judgment starting to happen. The day of judgment isn't even in full swing yet. These are the things, these are like the preamble, meaning it's still, the day of judgment hasn't started yet, where the trumpet is blown and then the people die, whoever's still alive, and then the trumpet is blown a second time and everybody, that hasn't even happened yet. This is just the preamble. And that's why you have the people still taking care of their camels, still living life, doing their day-to-day thing. And then all of a sudden they start looking around and they seeing all this. And whatever it was in the dunya that was important to them, it doesn't even matter anymore because of what's happening right now. So then, ayah number 5, right? Does that make sense, y'all? Khalas. So now ayah number 5, وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, and when the wild beasts are gathered. Now there's a different. A'udhu billahi minan nar. Allahu Akbar. That was super hot. But says, and when the wild beasts are gathered, there's different interpretations as to what that means. So some of the scholars would say that there's going to be this upheaval, right? Because everybody's panicking. Everybody sees that, right? The universe is changing. Everything in the universe is changing. And life is not like everything that they know, everything is changing now, right? So now they're starting to panic. Everybody's running, essentially like chickens with their heads cut off, right? And one of the things that will happen is the same with the animals, right? That they will be panicking and running, right? And they're afraid. And so they start running alongside and amongst and with the people, right? So this is one interpretation of what it means that they'll be gathered. And of course, just like human beings and the jinn will be forgetting their lives and their day-to-day dealings and their businesses and their families and whatever it is that they thought was important, the animals will forget, right? Their rivalry, their hostility, their hunger, and their natural instincts. All of that will be overridden, and they will simply be afraid of what is happening in front of them, right? And what they're witnessing, which will cause them to gather in a place or to one place, right? So that's some scholars' interpretation. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, for example, he mentions that everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created will be gathered, and even the flies. So the gathering of the animals and every other thing means their demise thereafter, except for the jinn and human beings. So another interpretation, and this is mentioned by Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, is that the animals will all be brought together, right, collectively, and then they will all be caused to die. And then the only thing left will be human beings and jinn. And prior to that, will be that whatever injustices that were between the animals before that, on the day of judgment, they will be able to get back. So if a horned animal struck another horned animal, right, or a beast attacked another animal, etc., then they will get their rights back. But then after that, they will all die. So that's what some of them say is the meaning of وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, when the wild beasts are then gathered. And then ayah number 6, وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, and when the seas are filled with flames. And so Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anh, he mentions that they'll become like a raging fire that surrounds the people in the gathering area, right? And if you remember last week, we mentioned how some scholars, they say what's going to happen to the oceans and the seas is that they'll start to be like a tsunami, right? And then these huge, massive waves after wave. And the point is that they keep progressing inward towards land, and it will keep overcoming and overcoming the land until they become, instead of separate different oceans, that they will combine and become one ocean, right? Only leaving one area for the people to be in. Either way, the thing that we need to take away from that, right? Because we said there's different interpretation, that some say that it's going to be actually boiling, fire. There's some that even say that it will actually be like a fire, that the water will boil to the extent that it becomes like a fire, or that it's this tsunami that's coming on each other until it finally becomes one ocean. At the end of the day, what we need to take away is that there are these huge events that are occurring, that everything, the way that we knew this world, that all of it will change. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply affirming for the Quraysh who denied that the day of judgment would happen anyways. This is Allah dispelling that. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing away with that. Like, don't think this is not going to happen. These are all of the details that are going to occur. It's not just something that is made up, or it's just some like fantastical thing, but that doesn't really have any details. He's telling you all of these details. Again, that's simply supposed to be like, for sure this is happening, right? And that's the main takeaway. Then the next ayah number 6, number 7. وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, and when the souls are paired. Yani وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. And so now this is essentially the second part of the day of resurrection starting to occur. The first part were like the preamble, yani everything that's starting the day of judgment to happen. Now it's actually the souls have their bodies, the souls have been returned to their bodies. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about that later part. So when he says that وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, it has a couple of meanings. One of them is that the souls, like I said, will be joined with the body, right? And that's what it means to pair. So what we have before, like in this life, right, is there's going to come a time when the soul separates from the body. And that's known as what? I actually mentioned that in the khutbah today. When the soul, it leaves the body. What is that? That's death. That's when you're dead. It's that simple. But the point here is that what? The two separate. Right? The two separate. After that, when they're joined again on the day of judgment, after that, they will never separate again. And if you go back even further, there was a point where it was just the soul, right? Because there are some ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he extracted from the backbone of Adam alayhi salam, all of the sons and daughters of Adam that will ever exist, all of them, right? And then he addressed them and told them, who am I? And then they said, you're our Lord. And they essentially agreed, right? And affirmed Tawheed, right? That there's only one Lord, that there's only one God worthy of worship. Now, but that's when the souls, they're separate. Then when you come into when the baby is born, right? They're still not together. Or when it's in the womb, the baby and the soul are not together yet. Or the fetus and the soul are not together. When do they come together, y'all? It's mentioned in a hadith. Huh? When are the soul and the fetus brought together? No. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned a hadith. يُؤْمَرُ إِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَا يُجْمَعُ خَلْقُ فِي بَطْنِ أُمِّهِ. Right? There's going to come a time you are fashioned and created inside of the womb of your mothers. Right? And he mentions what? That the angel is sent down after how long? Huh? No, he mentions that you're for 40 days mudgha, right? And then after 40 days, or alaqa, and then after that, mudgha, and then so on. And all together, collectively, it's how long, Ustad Hashir? Huh? 120 days? How many months is that? 30, 30. How many is that? And then 30. How many? 120, give or take, right? And then he says, يُرْسَلُ إِلَيْهِ الْمَلَكِ فَيَنْفُخُ فِيهِ الرُّوحِ وَيُؤْمَرُ بِأَرْبَعِ كَلِمَاتٍ. Right? He said, then after 4 months, after 120 days, an angel is sent down to that fetus that has, in Islam, we understand it to not have a soul. Prior to 4 months, a fetus does not have a soul in Islam. That's what we believe. So then what? Then the angel comes down. Then he brings the soul by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, places it in the fetus, right? And then he's commanded to write down 4 things. بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ وَأَجَلِهِ وَشَقِيٌّ أَوْ سَعِيدٌ. Then it writes down بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ, his provisions, how long they will live, and whether they will be miserable or happy, right? What kind of life they will have, right? Now, the point here is that what? That's a period now where the soul, there's a period in there where the soul and the body are not together. And then they're joined. And then we come into this world. And then we live. And then what's going to happen when we die? They're separated again. The soul and the body, no longer together once again. And then the day of resurrection will be, right, initiated, where the angel Israfil alayhi salam will blow the horn. Every single soul will die, right? So anybody who's alive at that time, which is what we were just describing in the beginning of the surah, right? When the sun is being wrapped up, that's all, just before the day of judgment. Then the Israfil is going to blow that horn, and then anybody who's alive at that point, kullu man alayha fan, they will all die, right? Except for whoever Allah wills, right? Then it's going to be blown a second time, and then the souls will be joined back with the bodies, and then after that, there will be no separation, because either they're going to paradise, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the people of paradise, or to the hellfire. May Allah protect us from that. But either way, for how long? Either way, for how long, y'all? Jannah or nar? Jazakallah khair. Forever. Meaning what? There is no separation from the soul and the body anymore after that. This is what we wanted to get to, right? Yes. 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 Those who are alive? No, that's why I said on the outset of explaining this ayah, now it's talking about the second phase or part of the resurrection. Now when everything is coming back together. The people who are alive, right? Yes. Excuse me, now in the grave. No, so hold on, because we said there's other opinions as well, right? So one of them is that when the soul joins the body again. And the second one is when yani ashabul yamin. Ma'a who? Who are they with? The people of the right hand. Ma'a ashabul yamin. Wa ashabul shimal. Ma'a ashabul shimal. So the people who are similar in what type of people they were in the dunya. If they were good people, the people of the right hand, so to speak, then those people, they will be collected and joined together on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And then the people who disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, disbelieved in him, etc., they will be joined together. And then, of course, then there's the as-sabiqun. The point here is that, so when you hear those verses talking about people turning and running away from their family, their parents, their mother, their friends, their loved ones, right? Like يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِي وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِي وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. This is the people who, because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the real likeness and similarity that they have, and the only one that matters, is their faith. So if they don't have the same faith, the same iman, and they weren't doing the same deeds, they had other priorities in this life, then even if they were kin and blood, they will not be joined together on Yawm al-Qiyamah. But they will be driven to be with the people who were like them, the people who prayed, the people who fasted, the people who had iman, the people who were fighting jihad, the people who were seeking knowledge, the people who were generous, the people who were compassionate, the people who were doing birr al-wali. All those people will be joined together. And then those people who disbelieve, who oppressed, who did wrong, who stole, who etc., then those people will be joined together, right? And this is one of the meanings of وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. Now, and this was the opinion of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala and other Sahaba from amongst them. No. So ayahs number 8 and 9. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And when the girl who is buried, meaning like not simply a girl, but more specifically like an infant girl, when she's buried alive and is asked for what sin was she killed. Right? So al-maw'udah, it means a female infant, right? And so, subhanallah, one of the practices that was present in the pre-Islamic era was that when a woman was giving birth, right? So while she's giving birth, she'd be brought outside and they would dig a hole right next to her so that if the infant that was born was a girl, then they would immediately take her and bury her in that hole. And if it was a boy, then they would take it, be proud, show him off, etc. But this was a practice that they had where they would bury them, right? And there's different reasons for this. So at that time, they used to do it out of fear of poverty, that how am I going to take care of them? How am I going to look after them? We barely got enough. I got 2-3 kids now. How am I supposed to take care of this one? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran to not, kill your children min khashyatil amlaq, right? Out of fear of poverty, right? Because again, someone doing that would show a type of belief that they have. If they're killing their child out of poverty and they're afraid of poverty in that sense, what does that mean they think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if they believe in Allah? Because you still have people who do that today. We don't want to have kids because we can't afford it, etc. What would that imply about their belief with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They have doubts about? Exactly, right? The idea that they have a weakness in the belief that Allah is Ar-Razaq, that Allah will provide for me, that Allah will provide for my family and my children, right? Matter of fact, go back to that hadith. We said that before they even come out of the womb, before they even come to full term, said what? وَيُؤْمَرُ بِأَرْبَعِ كَلِمَاتٍ, that the angels entrusted after having blown the soul into that fetus's body, right, to write down 4 things. بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ وَأَجَلِهِ وَشَقِيًّا أَوْ سَعِيدٍ. The first thing is there what? That the angel writes down is the rizq of that baby. Now, if you have a strong faith in that, if you have a strong belief in that, even if you don't have provisions at that moment while your wife is pregnant and the woman is pregnant herself, they have the belief and they're going to move and operate that we're not sure right now, but Allah's going to take care of us. So what that means is, it doesn't mean they're going to just sit down and be like, we're just going to chill and, inshallah, Allah will take care of us. But they're going to go and take all of the halal means possible, whether it's apply for a job or looking for what I need or, or try to start a business. But whatever, I'm going to do what I need to do. And whichever one is good for me, wherever my provision is, right, I'm going to get it. You understand? And so this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. But this is one of the reasons that people at that time that they used to essentially commit infanticide. But then also another reason that they used to what they used to do is that they were afraid that their daughters might eventually bring them shame, poverty, humiliation. Let's say, for example, when they have to either give their daughter off in marriage or in war, if they were to die, what in those days, back in the day, it's not something that was unique to Arabs, but essentially when people fought wars, what would happen to the women and children? They'd be taken as captives, and not simply just captives like prisoners of war. They would be what? They would be made into slaves. And so they saw that as like a type of humiliation. It would look at it like, well, if it's a boy, he's either going to fight, or excuse me, a son, when he becomes a man, he's either going to fight. And if he fights and he doesn't make it, he's going to die, but he's not going to be taken. You know what I'm saying? So that's part of the reason. So as far as like as today is concerned, subhanallah, we still have people who have that same mentality. Maybe not so much about slaves and captives and war, etc., but definitely when it comes to material, do we have enough? This is something that is still very, very prevalent, and and the irony is, in places that have more resources and material things, they're usually more concerned with that than other places that have extreme poverty. I mean, drought and famine, right? But the people who have enough, like the Western world, America, Europe, etc., they're extremely deeply concerned about having too many children. How much is it going to cost, and etc. And subhanallah, when you especially when you separate morality from people's day-to-day life, it does cause them to do like what you have these Arabs that is mentioned in this ayah, what they used to do. You have even till today people who do the same thing, whether for material things or other reasons. So, for example, here alone in the United States, just last year alone, there were 1 million abortions. 1 million, right? 1 million abortions. So they say for about every 1,000 babies that are born, there's 11.6 abortions, right? 11.6 abortions. Now, of course, you're going to have those who there's medical conditions, right, for the child. There's medical conditions, the mother's life potentially being threatened from, if she was to go through, carry the baby to term, etc., right? There are those who may have been, victims of sexual assault, right, etc., right? But that's not the overwhelming majority of the reasons behind abortions, right? And subhanallah, this is something those children, especially those Islamically, the way it's seen Islamically, if they reached 4 months, then they would definitely be included in this ayah. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ. That would be considered, right, that they have killed somebody in Islam. And a diya, right, an indemnification or blood money would have to be paid, right, for the child, right? And of course, بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And what has that baby done? And if you notice here in the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he does not even reference verbally, explicitly, directly the people who do the killing. They're not even worth being mentioned in the ayah. They won't even be asked, right? And instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying what? This child, this baby, this innocent child will be asked, what did you do, right, to be killed, right? And of course, they didn't do anything. The answer is obvious, right? That the baby didn't do anything. No. Blood money? Right. So Islamically, if someone was to commit murder, or rather manslaughter, because murder, there's going to be some level of either it was premeditated or whatever. There's similarly in Islam, there is like first degree, second degree murder, right? There are degrees of killing somebody, right, in terms of legally. And so if it was an accident, let's say, for example, la qaddar Allah, somebody was using their phone and they hit somebody and killed them, right? That would be what's known as manslaughter. They didn't do it on purpose, right? But due to some negligence or not paying attention or whatever, and it's still their fault, somebody else died. Okay, so now we can't say that they murdered somebody. They're not the same like somebody who went out and fought somebody and killed them, and their intent and their motive was, I wanted to kill that person. So how are you supposed to treat them? They still may be incarcerated, but they will also, how do you compensate the family for this loss of their family? and it's what they call dia, which is blood money, and the technical term is indemnification, right? That essentially it's like you financially compensating them for the loss of this life, right? So, for example, and sometimes even in American law, like somebody dies through the neglect of a doctor, right? Like malpractice. That's why they have insurances for doctors and stuff like that, so that the doctor does something right because he wasn't paying attention, or he knew he was supposed to sleep, he didn't get enough sleep, or he didn't follow proper procedure or whatever, right? That's called malpractice. So now the hospital may give the family, obviously you can't bring that person back, but we're going to give you a little something, financial compensation for having lost, son, daughter, family, whatever, right? Something like that. Does that make sense? خلاص. طيب. 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 So then it goes وإذا الصحف نشرت. وإذا الصحف نشرت, and when the pages are spread out. And that's because on the day of resurrection, right, it's the day of hisab, it's the day of accounting, and it's the day when people's records and everything that's been recorded, good or bad, all of that will be open and brought to bear, right? So nushirat, when the pages are spread, because everything that they did, right, is recorded, but now it will be made public. So if they had evil plots, if they had secrets, if they had clandestine, activities, all of that's going to be brought to bear. And so this is another aspect of the upheaval that's going to envelope all human beings. And Ad-Dhahhak, he mentions that every person will be given his page in his right hand or his left hand. And so it's also been recorded that Qatada, rahimahullah, he mentions, O son of Adam, it is recorded, then it is rolled up, then it will be handed to you on the day of resurrection. So let every person look to what he dictates to be written on his page. Al-Muhim, the point is what? Everything that you do is being detailed, recorded, and analyzed. So make sure that you're careful about what you do. And the idea is that what? The recording of those deeds are in preparation and being ready for the actual day of judgment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially the Quraysh and essentially hitting them upside the head with all of these details and getting their mind ready. Like, listen, you don't believe, but these are all the things that are going to happen. And then all your deeds are going to be prepared. Just know for sure that this is happening. It's going down. So make sure that you what? That you get ready. That's why Allah's telling you this. So then, so of course, that's for them. But since we're reading this some 1400 years later, it's the same message for us, right? And subhanAllah, something interesting to note too is that Allah was telling these people these details because they didn't believe, right? And so this was to wake them up. Something that we should consider for ourselves is, what do we feel when we read these ayat? What do we feel when we read these ayat? Is it just like we're reading the newspaper and it's just something like, oh, really, that's going to happen? Oh, subhanAllah, right? Or is it something that terrifies you? It makes you afraid. It makes you concerned. That when you look up at the sky and you be like, man, that same sky that I see right now, Allah's telling me that thing's going to be ripped open. And that same sun and how beautiful it is, and sunshine, and you know what I'm saying, mashallah, tabarakallah, and how wonderful that is. One day, man, that thing's going to be rolled up like it's a piece of paper. And those mountains that people die on because of how sturdy and how strong and how magnificent and grand they are, how big they are. How many people died trying to climb Mount Everest, right? Or Kilimanjaro, right? Which is crazy if you think, right? People try to climb a mountain that starts with the name Kill a Man. But anyways, subhanAllah, because of how big it is, right? And Allah's telling us, yep, that's going to be blown away like it's just nothing but dust. You're supposed to be like, how's that even possible? How? This thing right here, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you could reach out and if you were close somewhere and you could touch, like, how's this big old thing supposed to be something that's going to be like cotton? And you just be like, whew. So then the next thing is, if you start thinking like that, then the next thing you're supposed to be thinking like, subhanAllah, how great and grand is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this big old thing that makes me as a human being look like this small, like nothing, this is going to be turned to dust. How great is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That sun that's so big and that's so great is going to just be rolled up like it's a piece, meaning how easy it is for Allah to do that. How great and grand is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how magnificent is He for Him to do that. طيب. So وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ كُشِطَتْ وَإِذَا السَّمَاءُ كُشِطَتْ, and when the sky is stripped away. And so this is another thing that'll occur. It says, and among the great events which will engulf the universe at the time of resurrection is that the familiar protection that we have. Yeah, I need like the atmosphere and the sky, right? And the cell that sustains us. All of that will be removed and be peeled back. And the heavens will be separated from the earth, right? Everything that's familiar to us. وَإِذَا الْجَحِيمُ سُعِّرَتْ, and when the hellfire is set ablaze. And so part of the belief of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that both paradise and the hellfire exist now. They are there now, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that once the day of resurrection starts and things are set in motion and everything starts changing, right, in the universe, that now the hellfire that is already there, that is already extremely hot, that's so hot that the Prophet ﷺ said it complains that portions of it are consuming other parts of it. That's how hot the hellfire is, that it's essentially cannibalizing and eating itself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the hellfire complained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah allowed the hellfire to take 2 breaths throughout the year, one in the summer and one in the winter. And the Prophet ﷺ said, whenever you feel the extreme heat of the summer, that's the hellfire breathing. And the second is when you feel in the winter time, which is on us now. When you feel the extreme cold of the winter, again, that's the hellfire breathing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. But He says, when the day of judgment is started, that now it will be set ablaze. So now it's just kind of sitting there, but then that fire will be stoked, in preparation for the people who are going to be thrown in it. Right? وَإِذَا الْجَحِيمُ سُعِّرَتْ وَإِذَا الْجَنَّةُ أُزْلِفَتْ, and when the paradise is brought near and it's brought close. And so, as we mentioned, that paradise is already created. This is part of the belief of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that it's attended by the angels, and it's prepared for the righteous. But when it's said that it's brought near, as opposed to using the word yani qareeb, right, that it's brought near from qurb, uzlifat, it's a type of honoring. So not only is it brought close, but it's a type of honoring for them, that it'll be brought near to them, right? Again, in preparation for who? Right, the people of paradise. And then also something interesting that's worth mentioning here is that part of the eloquence of the Quran is the symmetry and the balance that it always brings, especially when talking about the people who are righteous and the people who are evil. When it talks about paradise, it talks about hell. When it talks about righteous good deeds, and it talks about oftentimes, right, wrong deeds or evil deeds, right? And that kind of teaches us the significance and the importance of balance, right? Because on the one hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us that the hellfire is going to be set ablaze. That's supposed to instill fear in you and make you afraid. And then on the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you about paradise and the rewards and how it's brought in close. And that's supposed to inspire in you like hope and love right? And a yearning and a want. So it creates this like balance in the psychology and the thinking of the Muslim, right? That it's not all fear and it's not all hope, right? But there's a balance. You got to have both fear and hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, طيب. علمت نفس ما أحضرت. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, a soul will then know what it has brought with it. So he tells us what? That Allah informs us that mankind will essentially be given the memory and the ability to remember everything in their life. So, like right now, some of us, we don't remember what happened last week, let alone 2 months ago, let alone when I was 3 years old, right? But on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, alimat nafsum ma ahdarat, that a soul will know everything that it brought. Everything that ever occurred in your life, for better or worse, you will remember it. So imagine all the good things that you did. Of course, those are nice, maybe fond memories or whatever, right? Especially those that may have had some type of significance. But then even the things that were mundane, even the times where you weren't even doing necessarily something haram, but you weren't doing anything that was beneficial either. And looking back on those times like, man, I could have been making dhikr at that time. Man, I could have given charity. Man, I could have been doing some type of good. And instead I was relaxing or chilling, which is fine. But you're not going to feel the same way about it on the day of judgment, right? But the point here is that in this life, the ability to forget some things is a blessing. Trauma, hardships, right? Imagine if those were always with you at all times, how challenging and difficult life would be like to get through, right? It's a blessing, right? That Allah gives us the ability to forget things. But on Yawm al-Qiyamah, you will be able to remember everything, right? For better or worse. No? And so actually, we're going to stop here. I mentioned that the surah is essentially broken into two parts, right? So, in summary, some of the lessons that I wanted to point out and summarize for us taken from this first part, again, is the reality and the belief in the day of judgment, right? That the day of judgment occurring is a pillar of iman, of faith. It is a part and parcel of what makes us believers. You cannot be a Muslim if you don't believe in the day of judgment. And of course, from the belief in the day of judgment, right, is not just the day itself, but the things that occur before it, the day, the time that you're in the grave, and then everything that occurs once the day of judgment actually starts. All of that is a part and parcel of belief in the day of judgment. So when we talk about the sun rising from the west, or like we mentioned now, the sun being rolled up, or the seas boiling over and the oceans boiling over, the stars falling out of this, all of these different things, right? And even the major signs, the Mahdi, the Dajjal. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the Dajjal, the Dabba, which is like the beast, which is mentioned in the Quran, and other things like that. Those are all before the day of judgment. But they're a part and parcel of the belief in the day of judgment. And then, of course, what happens in the grave, whether it is bliss and reward, right, while waiting for the day of judgment to be initiated, or the horrors and the torture and the punishment of the grave, and then also the day of judgment itself. All of that is being affirmed in this surah, along with the other two surahs that came before it, that we did before. Surah Infitar and Surah Al-Inshiqaq. And of course, the benefit of that belief is what? This idea of accountability. That, listen, I'm not worried about you. I'm not worried about the police. I'm not worried about authority in the sense that they're going to ask me. But before them, I'm concerned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Him seeing me and then me having to stand in front of him on the day of judgment. So I do what I'm supposed to do because ultimately I'm going to have to answer to him. I take care of my responsibilities, right? Because again, it's the right thing to do, but because I'm going to have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I give my wife her rights, regardless of how I feel. Because sometimes a husband, he feels deeply, madly in love. And sometimes he feels like, man, I love my wife, but I don't like my wife. I love my wife, but I don't like my wife. Mumkin, that's possible. A husband might feel like that. But at the end of the day, as long as he's still married to her, he's going to do what? He's going to give her rights. Not because of her, but because of whom? Because listen, I got to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and answer for that. Same for the kids, same for any other relationship, same for anything where I have rights and responsibilities that I have to fulfill. It's because I'm standing in front of Allah. The day of judgment is supposed to inculcate that in us. And then the other thing too is reflecting on the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because of course, when you talk about the sun, the moon, the stars falling out of the sky, mountains being turned to dust, etc., all of these different things, who's doing that? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the things that we should be taking from this surah is reflecting on the power and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that he's able to do whatever he wants and whatever he wills. And he's not answerable to anyone. Right? And the other thing too, this is the last thing I'll say, is the value of human life. The value of human life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he condemns, right, the practice of the Arabs to, burying their daughters. And he tells the believers the same thing, that this is not, right, you shouldn't be afraid of poverty more than you're afraid of me. You shouldn't be worried about material things more than you're concerned and worried about me. To the extent that it would cause you or to do something terrible and tragic and ugly as burying an innocent, baby. Which again, this also shows the importance of people's aqeedah and their beliefs. Anybody who ever tells you aqeedah is not important and belief is not important has no idea what they're talking about. So for example, if you look at Zionism and the belief, right? So we're not talking about Judaism. We're talking about Zionism, right? It's like ethnic supremacy. Allows them to do what? Because based on their beliefs, look at the ugly actions that they're able and capable of doing. That we're all, people watch in 4K, unprecedented in history. And the same thing for our brothers and sisters like in Sudan. Again, what belief would they have that would allow them to do something like that? And it's not just there too. Again, so we're not talking about in the context of just Muslims or Christians or Jews. In the Congo and what's happening in the Congo, right? And in other places, right? Again, people doing terrible, ugly things, but all of that goes back to their what? To their belief, like what they believe, right? Because if you genuinely, truly believe that I have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'd be afraid to do something like that. You would be afraid. But of course, if you don't believe in a hereafter, or you don't believe that there's a day of judgment, then as long as you think you're going to get away with it, then there's nothing to stop you. As long as you think you're going to get away with it. No? So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show us the truth for what it is, and that he grant us the strength, the courage, and the sincerity to follow it, to call to it, to fight, to protect it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us falsehood for what it is, and to grant us the strength, the courage, the sincerity to stay away from it, to call others away from it, and to fight those who would try to spread falsehood. Allahumma ameen. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. So طيب, just ask if there are any questions related to what we talked about or what I talked about. Otherwise, we will stop here.